Hello, my name is Mohit Deshpande, and in this course I will be showing you the back end to the Social Notes application. So, what we have here is a class called Social Notes, and inside of it you can see that we have a private constructor which prevents this class from being initialized. This class also has a final modifier, meaning that no other class can extend this class. And throughout my code you'll see comments like this, and you'll also see some java.comments comments like this. And what these java.comments comments do, if you hover over them, it displays the text right here. And these are really useful if you're working with someone else, because then they'll have an idea of what this method does and how they can use it. Alright, so right here we have a field called authority. And the backing end for this Social Notes application is a SQLite database. SQLite is a form of database very similar to SQL, but it's been scaled down so that it can fit on mobile phones. And we can create a class to handle all of these calls into the database, whether those calls be inserting new rows, deleting rows, updating rows, retrieving rows. We can also create tables, we can create indexes and such. Android has a really nice way of allowing developers to use this SQLite database without having to deal with some of the possible errors that could come up from this. It's called a content provider. And what this content provider does is it essentially acts like a wrapper for the SQL database. You'll see when we open up our content provider class, you'll see similar functions such as insert, delete, update, query. All of these calls are actually being put into the database and then being dynamically returned to us. So we need this authority for the content provider, and you'll see I'll make a note of it in the code. You can see we have this note class, which is also final and static, so that we can access it through the social notes class. And what this does is it basically holds all the database column and other things that the content provider will need. And of course, there's no initializing this class. This really wouldn't help at all anyway. We have this content URI. Now, content providers use kinds of URIs. They're similar to the HTTPS or FTP kind of file transfers. Like you can see this content we have here. And the content URI is simply the word content, the authority, which is the full name of, in most cases, the full name of your content provider, as well as a / and then a subdirectory. Alright, what we have here, these content type and content item types, they're essentially what the get type method in the content provider retrieves. Whether you're looking for a single note right here, this would return a single note. It would tell that the MIME type of this was a single note. Or we can return the content type here, meaning that the MIME type is notes, plural. Alright, moving on, these are the names of the columns that are going to be in the dash. We have a title column, we have a content column, we have a latitude and longitude columns. Those are pretty self-explanatory there. Alright, let's move on to the actual provider class. Now, when you first look at this might seem a bit daunting at first, but we're going to go through each line of code step by step, and I'll explain what this does. Alright, so we have some Java here. You can see that our provider extends content provider, and this is mandatory. It must extend content provider in order to override these functions. Alright, you can see we have a tag, which is just the name of the class.getSimpleName, which would just return this social notes provider. And the tag is mainly used for logging. Any kinds of logs would show up here on logcat. It's where you would plug in your device or go on the emulator, and it would show you a list of logs, and really helpful for developers if you're trying to look through an error. And what logcat would do is it would tell you the exact lines of code where the error is happening. It's very useful. You can see we have some constants. We have the name of the database, we have the table name, we have the version, and we have the database helper, which I'll get to right down here. Moving on, we have some stuff that the content provider uses. We have a URI matcher, and like I said, content providers use URIs. And what the URI matcher does is it prevents our content provider from getting URIs from different content providers. Like, I'll get to this here. We initialize it here and we add 2 URIs. This is to retrieve all kinds of general nodes. This is to retrieve a specific node. And what this does is it prevents this content provider from getting things like maybe from like an action insert from maybe the contacts application. Well, it shouldn't handle this because it wasn't made to handle this. That's why we have a URI matcher. We have the projection map here, and what it does is it basically maps out in Java code the columns that we're using. So it's just essentially just the names of the columns. It's a map of 2 strings. It's just the name of the columns and then the name of the columns again. And it's optional, but it's really recommended that you use a projection map. And we have some identifications that we'll use later on in the code to identify between a single note right here or all of the notes plural right here. And in most cases, it's going to be operations will be to a single note. Very rarely will it be to all nodes. Alright, you can see this little block here. We just have the word static and then 2 curly braces here. That is a static initialization block. And essentially what it does is it kind of acts as a constructor to this class, even though it doesn't have a constructor by default. We haven't put in one because it's not needed. But what it does is as soon as this class is loaded into the VM, all of this in this block is run. All the code in this block is executed. There are instance initialization blocks, but they're really rare, and why use an instance initialization block when you can just use a constructor? As you can see, we're not going to have a constructor in this class. If I can find the outline. You see, there's no constructor in this class at all, other than in here, the database helper. Alright, now what this database helper is essentially a wrapper for the raw SQLite database. We don't want to have to access the database and then deal with certain things, so we'll just use the database helper, and Android does a really good job of providing this for us. Now what we need is a context, and a context is really, you can read the Java doc here, interface to global information about an application environment. Contexts are very essential to the Android system here. Alright, you can see we have a constructor here, and it takes a context. What this does, this super, is it calls SQLite open helper with in a constructor. When you use this calls the constructor of the super class, which is SQL OpenLite helper. This is mandatory. It must be there. And the nice thing about the Eclipse IDE is that when you extend these classes and you create a constructor, this will be put in not this exact line of code, but this line of code will be put in by default, so you don't have to go through and manually add in all this. And you see that the context that's given to us, we assign it to this.